June the 4th this year marks 35 years since Beijing's bloody crackdown on dissent in Tiananmen Square, when the Chinese army opened fire on student-led pro-democracy protesters. There's no definitive death toll, but hundreds and possibly thousands of people were killed. For years, commemorations of the massacre were banned on the mainland, but not in Hong Kong. That changed in 2019 when the city's clampdown on dissidents following huge anti-government protests in 2019 came into effect. That, after which Hong Kong's once huge Tiananmen vigil also fell silent. Well, for more on this, we can bring in Elaine Pearson, the Asia Director at Human Rights Watch. Thank you very much indeed for being with us today. How will the Tiananmen Square massacre be remembered today in China and also in the Chinese diaspora?
Well, certainly in China, the Chinese government is doing everything it can to suppress and censor and erase, basically, the memory of what actually happened 35 years ago when PLA soldiers opened fire and killed an unknown number of students, protesters, workers, and those who were in the square and protesting all around China. So, while we see the Chinese government taking every step they can to put those who would like to commemorate Tiananmen under surveillance, just in April, they actually sentenced one of the 1989 student leaders to 4 years in prison for attempting to get the Chinese government to acknowledge what happened in Tiananmen. So we know that in China, there will be, no public attempt to discuss this. But even in Hong Kong, where there has been huge vigils in the past, these days, it's very risky. And I mean, last night we just saw, a lone activist, making a performance on the street. He was immediately arrested. But around the world, we are seeing discussions of what happened in Tiananmen, and people don't want to forget what happened 35 years ago. They think it's really important to remember and commemorate for those victims.
How difficult is it then to access information about the Tiananmen Square massacre within China today?
Well, I mean, the Tiananmen massacre is probably the most highly censored topic on the Chinese internet. It is impossible to get information. I mean, all sorts of the numbers, June 4th, 6/4, are highly censored. So, people have managed to find out because people are curious. They want to know what's happened. They've managed to watch documentaries. They've managed to read articles about what has happened in Tiananmen. But it's getting very, very difficult. And that is because the Chinese government is determined to erase and suppress those discussions instead of acknowledging what happened and investigating and apologising to the families of the victims who died in the Tiananmen massacre 35 years ago.
Are there any remaining visible remnants of the Chinese dissident movement still active in China today?
Well, yes, there are. I mean, there are certain, as I mentioned, just, the other month, someone actually did try 2 years ago to hold up a sign, in remembrance of those who died in the Tiananmen massacre. So people are still going to great lengths. I mean, you had the white paper protests. And so there's certainly, a desire from some people in China for change. And I think that's what, the Chinese Communist Party feels so threatened and intimidated by. And they really try and snuff out any of that. And I mean, Hong Kong was the one place where, these vigils occurred. These days, statues commemorating Tiananmen at universities have been torn down. Bookshops have more security. You can't get books anymore talking about what happened at Tiananmen. University courses are being changed. So we're really seeing the way in which, these measures that have been taken on the mainland are now also being exported to other places to try and silence these discussions.
Now, last week, 14 Hong Kong pro-democracy activists were found guilty in a landmark subversion trial that critics say deals yet another blow to the city's rule of law. Is that how you saw those convictions?
Yes, I mean, this was the largest, most high-profile national security trial, a trial of 47 people. 14 of them had pled not guilty, 16 actually, and 14 of them were found guilty and are due to be sentenced. I mean, I think this shows how far Hong Kong has changed. I mean, what those people did was they simply tried to organise an informal primary vote. This is showing utter contempt for democratic processes. The fact that these people could now potentially face very long sentences in jail simply for trying to uphold the rights to democracy that they were promised by Beijing and that Beijing has reneged on. So, I think we're seeing the way in which the Chinese and the Hong Kong administration are really doing everything they can to silence criticism and to snuff out those who would like to express freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of speech. And I think this is something that should be very concerning for those of us all around the world, not just those in China and in Hong Kong, because, it really sends a message of intolerance and the fact that the Chinese government is doing everything it can to make a message from these prosecutions, and that's a very chilling message, not to speak out, not to join protests in Hong Kong any longer.
Just a few days ago, the UN demanded the immediate release of Hong Kong activists detained arbitrarily. The US also recently announcing it would be imposing new visa restriction on Hong Kong officials, implementing that deeply divisive national security law. Any signs at all, do you think, that China is likely to heed those warnings and threats?
Well, I think we need to see broader pressure from, a range of different governments, not just, a few of the usual suspects speaking out and condemning these actions, but actually following up, those words with action. And I think we do want to see targeted sanctions against those who have been the perpetrators of human rights abuses, those who've been involved in passing such a broad, vague and sweeping national security law. And I think that will only happen if there is concerted pressure on the Chinese government from various different quarters. So I think it is about getting the message out about what is happening in China and in Hong Kong to people all around the world in different countries, and for people to recognize that this law does not stop at China or Hong Kong's borders. It also applies to Hong Kongers who are living abroad, who are speaking up, who are joining advocacy meetings, who potentially could be found, running afoul of this law. And so we really, really look to governments to consider what are the additional measures that they could take to make the Chinese government pay attention to this and to make it very clear that they're very concerned about the arrest and detention of these protesters, of people who, really should be at the forefront of building civil society and building civic change in Hong Kong. And instead, they're paying very heavy price with their freedom. And those who have managed to evade prison have had to flee into exile in other countries. So I also think there's more that foreign governments can be doing to accept Hong Kongers who need to leave the country, and to ensure that they are, able to safely continue their peaceful work, speaking up about the human rights situation in Hong Kong and China.
Elaine Pearson, thank you so much for speaking to us here on France 24 today. Elaine Pearson, Asia Director at Human Rights Watch, speaking to us just there.
Thank you.